I'll start with the gentleman up front.
How many vertical well shafts are allowed for 640 acre unit? I mean, confused, there's a lot of horizontal shafts, but they only allow one vertical bore for 640 acre unit?
No, the way they're drilling them now is each horizontal actually has a vertical.
One vertical and one horizontal? I understood that they go out maybe 5 or 6 horizontal.
You can. I don't know, this may be a little confusing because a lot of the pictures you see are, what they'll do is they'll drill one lateral out of a vertical well shaft, okay, and then move the rig and drill the next lateral. There's also the ability to take the laterals in two opposite directions out of the same well shaft. Then there's a patented process, I think CSX or somebody has a process where it's called a star pattern, where you can literally drill in multiple directions out of a single vertical well bore. But in most cases, in a lot of cases, it's one or two laterals out of one vertical.
How many possible verticals are allowed on 640 acre unit?
In New York State,
Are you talking about, let me just,
What I'm wondering is, how many units, how many wellheads are going to be shown above the ground in 640 acre unit? I mean, will it be 20? Will it be 2? Are they limited?
there'll be,
Or is it up to the gas company?
I think what you're getting at is you're gonna have a 5-acre drilling pad, 5-acre pad. All the wells will be drilled from that 5-acre pad. So whether it's, I haven't done the math, but whether it's 4 or 8 wells drilled from that pad that go out into the 640, that's all you're gonna see.
You're only allowed one 5-acre pad for the 640 acres.
nah,
No,
the way it works in New York, the maximum unit you can define, the maximum amount of acreage you can pull into one unit is the 640 acres. You're required to drill that. You're required to basically drill what you're going to drill on that 640. You can do it vertically, okay? But you're required to drill what you have to drill within a 3-year period. It's that there's a part of the law requires the development at 640 acres. The industry is looking at it as an opportunity to, we'll try to minimize the vertical and maximize the laterals. So New York State has, in the spacing law, you have 330 feet offsets between what would be the well. So you're going to have a well bore, okay, a lateral well bore, then 330 feet, then 330 feet, then another lateral well bore, okay? So however you define that 640 acres, you have to literally draw it up and draw the well bores in there to show what you can drill. And then what you'll do is define the vertical holes you need to get those orientations. So I'm not trying to be evasive, right? There's not an easy answer to that. I would imagine, I don't have a calculator. I don't know my watch. I could.
There will be a well bore sticking above the surface every 5 acres in 640 acres.
There won't be, but there is allowed to be.
you could drill, if you wanted to drill vertical wells, what I try to say is if you wanted to drill vertical wells, the spacing for a Marcellus well is 40 acres. So you could drill, on that 640 acres, you could drill 16 vertical wells, okay? But the impact of that would be that 16 vertical wells and each would consume 2 acres. You'd be affecting 32 acres on the surface.
So that would give you the maximum. The most you can put on 640, that would do it. That would give you 16. The maximum number of holes, verticals would be 16.
Right.
Again? Yeah.
John,
Yeah.
what impact, if any, on this new proposal with Tiger County, New York, using the propane shelter? What impact do you see on that in New York State?
Everybody's asking that question. I'll give the answer because a few people have come up to me and I sort of talked to them about not just the idea of what impact, but what I thought of the process. I'm all for changes, doing better, whatever works. The industry is evolving to what does the best job from a stimulation perspective. This is John Holko's opinion of I don't think you get around anything by using propane. I think you're still going to be bound by some changes in the 92 GEIS. If I was in the DEC's office and somebody sent in a permit application to use propane, I'd ask them to give some specifics involving the propane. So it would include additional information. The question really revolves around how much volume, because the volume that they're looking at is volume of liquid. You're pumping liquid propane. So if you're above 80,000 gallons, then I think, well, it's going to be 300,000 gallons with the new SGIS. So if you're over 300,000 gallons, you're going to fall into some of the new obligations. If you're under 300,000 gallons, you're limited by the old ones. So it's, I'm not so sure it expedites anything, if that's the question.
John, is that propane also recoverable when it's used as a fracking fuel?
In most cases it is, but you have to have the system and the equipment in place to recover it. Yeah, if it was a vertical well to start with, and it depends on the casing sizes. In most cases, they want to come out, they're trying to get larger, above 7-inch diameter casing to turn a lateral, from that point. Because if the well bore is too narrow, the tools you need to do the drilling are too big to put inside the hole.
Questions? Yes, sir. Just tell us where you're from.
I have a question on it in Owego. It's a question either for Greg or for John. It has to do with this prohibition in setback. And is it your understanding that local communities would be able to take this within a county or within a region, select region, where there'd be investor interest in gas, and they can apply metrics to this, the way the law is constructed now, so they can measure the impact. You've mentioned it on the state level, from 80 to 50, it's all kind of all over the place. But it boils down to the question of how can those metrics be established locally?
Well, I know what I did for my company is I took the language of the setbacks and the prohibitions are specific, so many feet from this, so many feet from that. What I had done is, I've taken, and the question was, can you apply the metrics to setbacks and prohibitions to a municipal type area or to an area, and you could do the same thing a company would do. And what I did was, I had a guy with a GIS system, a mapping program, essentially take my leasehold position and start applying those and changing the color of the map. So my lease map started out yellow, and then we started turning it to gray every time we applied a setback. And like I said, I have one area I literally lost everything. When you go as far as to apply the obligations of the grasslands and the forests with the 40-acre and the 150-acre rule and stay out of it for a year and the other things, you start to affect huge amounts of land in this state. And you have to remember, those setbacks are all cumulative. So each one adds on to the other one, and it starts taking more and more and more away. But every community, if they have a GIS system, which a lot of them do, just even use the tax base, you can start applying it that way. The hard part is, whether New York State understands it or not, there's no real good, clear map basis for their setbacks.
Well, there's changes like in the floodplains and so on, these floods are created.
Correct. They've created a bunch of scenarios too. We don't really know where the floodplain lines are anymore. Most of them need to be updated anyway. The point that I want to make, though, is that I told you during my presentation that we drilled 10,000 wells without incident in New York, and we also, that includes wells in aquifers. Now, what DEC has come out to say is we can't drill wells in aquifers, period. Okay? So the only place in the world where you can't drill a well in an aquifer is in New York State. Does that make sense to anybody? And really, that's the gist of what I tried to point out in terms of the kinds of setbacks and prohibitions which will make leaseholds uneconomic and which will reduce investor interest. Absolutely.
Ron from Drive New York. Just wondering about you guys, the actual referring to the watershed in Syracuse in New York City, why it was set up that way. A lot of people tend to think, you're going to protect those two areas, you don't want to protect the rest of New York. But can you please explain why the DEC decided not to drill in those areas?
Yes. I can tell you what the reason they said for not drilling in those areas. And that was that these are two watersheds that do not treat their water. In other words, they take the water directly from the reservoir and bring it to New York City without treatment. And there's a non-treatment designation, I don't know the exact term, that EPA has given them. If the idea was that if the state allowed drilling in the watershed, then that may trigger EPA withdrawing that non-treatment designation, meaning they'd have to put in a treatment plant at a cost of $40 billion or some astounding number. So that's the reason they were given. Now, while you're on that topic, let me just say that a watershed, the definition of a watershed is the water that's deposited in that watershed. And so when you draw the boundaries of a watershed, which I'm sure they did very generously, that means that all the water is flowing back to the reservoir. They have said, DEC has said, well, their concern is not the subsurface with the drilling, but what could happen on the surface. So if you drill a well theoretically 2 inches from the watershed, the water is supposed to flow in the other direction. So there would be no impact on the watershed. And therefore you don't need a 4-mile setback or a 7-mile setback or even a 1,000-foot setback from the watershed. So they've taken Delaware County people, essentially they've made their land worthless because of the setbacks that they've imposed on that watershed. There is no scientific, technical reason to have any more than a minimal setback from those watersheds.
It's called a filter avoidance determination, a FAD, is what the EPA refers to it as.
Question? Yes, sir. Tell us where you're from.
I'm Charlie Carpenter. You are receiving money from the state, and that's depending on how much you produce, and over time that's going to go down. And eventually, they have to produce everybody there. Are you taking the money that you have and putting it into a fund like they've done? So they take the money, basically
his question was, in Pennsylvania, because we're now gonna get some revenue from the impact fee, are we gonna follow a model like in Alaska where they create a legacy fund? My answer is, I don't know. I don't think the numbers are gonna be high enough for the county government that there's gonna be much longevity. This retroactive check that we're going to get is, as I said, maybe $750,000 or something like that. That's about what we get in a tax increase in a regular year. About $1 mill or 2 mills of real estate would bring it in. You know, my own preference is just we would use it to hold down having to raise taxes for next year. But we're getting people coming out of the woodwork because the eligible uses for that money that come into the counties are very broad, and one of them is tax avoidance. But we're getting emergency services called yesterday before I left for this and said, we want to build a new shelter for our emergency service apparatus. It'd be $250,000. So there in one phone call, they wanted 1/3 of it. So I don't think there's going to be the quantity. Now over in Bradford County, that suggestion might make a lot more sense because they're going to be getting millions, assuming they pass it. I don't know that Bradford's taking action on it. Yeah, I mean, I like the philosophy of, you know, think of the future, think of 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and don't just spend it like a typical politician, because you get money and you want to spend it. So I think that idea has merit if there's enough to do something with.
I think also the answer is, having been a state official, is that one of the things that if they move forward on hydrofracking is to talk to your state senator and your state assemblyman, those people, and say that if we're going to be asked to do X, Y, and Z, you've got to have more revenue sharing with the local governments. I mean, what may happen in Pennsylvania doesn't necessarily mean that in New York there can't be more funds available at the local level. So the idea is to lobby for it, and I think that the answer is the legislators know that's where they've come in. And I think you just have to press them to make sure that you share in revenue.
Yes.
Yes.
So I can see a lot of money coming into the investment, and if they put it away, getting them schools and how many
I just want to say the ad valorem tax is a tremendous deal for local governments. And you don't play with that. Don't let the legislature or anybody play with that. If the state passes a severance tax or tries to get fees, that should all be in addition. But do not take that money away. If they pass a severance tax and revise that and take your money away, you're never going to see it again. That was a deal that was made back in 1981, and it's been a tremendous boon for local governments.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, his question in terms of Pennsylvania is what types of businesses have seen the increase in growth as a result of shale gas development. And I did mention railroads. We don't have any in Potter County, unfortunately. We tore them all up just before this all happened. And you're not going to be getting the rights of way back because now they're all trails or they've reverted to people's gardens, you name it. So we're envious of all the counties around us that they kept their railroad tracks. I can talk from personal experience. I have a friend who owns a stone quarry, and he has been busier than the Dickens, just grinding the stone and putting it out there for road stabilization. Auto mechanics, the shops have been busier than heck. They've got trucks lined up just about every day. They've got contracts with some of the drilling companies to maintain their vehicles. We've had people that are going into, even job training itself is becoming an industry because they're getting people ready for welding and truck driving in particular. Our biggest growth in Potter County has been a company called Gas Field Specialists. They're sort of a mom and pop version of Schlumberger or Halliburton. They do all kinds of gas field. They're in second or third generation. They did all the shallow wells for years and years, had a very good reputation. They've exploded. Rough numbers, I'd say they probably had 20 employees 2 years ago, maybe 30. They're probably at least 200 right now, and in our county, that would drop the unemployment rate by about half. And they are good jobs, they're good paying jobs. The aspect of that I bring up again, I'm good friends with the CEO of that company. You can't find the people that have the work ethic, that want to get up there, do that hard work, and are drug-free. Marijuana is a huge problem. Basically, in the words of my son's generation, they piss hot. And obviously, they won't tolerate that. I hear it from both sides, but that's a huge problem. Another one is a transport company, a trucker. They've been able to add a lot of jobs and add a lot of business. Sand storage in the counties right next to ours has been huge. The ones that have the rail, they're bringing in that special silica sand around the clock and loading it and taking off, and then it's getting trucks and being taken out the wall site. And that's during a lull. Lord knows what's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years. When the price goes up and the pipelines are there.
Yeah, I'd say the immediate, and we have a lot of New York companies. I have clients in New York who have sites, mining sites in New York and in Pennsylvania. So that's a very big industry, the mining industry, which Paul mentioned. For road stabilization, for drilling pads, for a whole variety of different things. Secondly, also, many of these same companies are involved with asphalt paving. And so there'll be there already is, a tremendous amount of asphalt paving. When we saw Mark Galasso from Cobleskill, his company, Lancaster Development, he said half of his employees are in Pennsylvania because they are doing asphalt paving down there, and they are doing sand and gravel operations and things like that. We in New York, with regard to infrastructure per se, there will be staging areas and things like that. There'll be, of course, the water treatment part of the business somewhere along the line, whether that's mobile or whether there are plants that are going to be put in, and that becomes a big question. And unless they're going to be here, nobody's going to make an investment in a plant in New York. So that's the reason why you don't have plants being built. But there will be staging areas. There will be the kinds of other service industries. The difference between Potter County, which is a little bit different because they're so rural, we in New York have the ability to assimilate a lot of the population and a lot of the businesses that are already here. He's kind of creating he's like a North Dakota. We had nothing there, and all of a sudden it's a boom town. We have we have an old infrastructure. We have our road systems. Our road systems are much better than Pennsylvania. Have always been better than Pennsylvania. So you probably won't see the kind of road building that you did down there, although clearly that's a major concern, and that should be a major concern for local governments. There was something else I was going to say, but I'll leave it at that.
More questions? Yes, sir. Just elsewhere, your friend.
Marty Work Waverly, New York. Karen, I know you're interested, you came from the farm, you're interested in farming. Can you tell me what has happened in Bradford County, the most growing county in Pennsylvania, in the last 3 years with respect to the number of operating farms?
I don't have the statistics on the number of operating farms. There are a lot of farms that actually have grown and expanded. So I know that the number of farms means the loss of active, if there, in other words, if there was a farm that, wasn't operated by the same person, a number of the farms that were benefiting were actually expanding and buying up additional land. I can also speak to some of the farmers I talked to in the area of Luther Township where I traveled, who were able to buy, they were buying up additional farmland, and they were able to then also sell their, keep the land and sell the mineral rights. So there's a number of different stories about, and you get it, it's anecdotal, really. A lot of it is about who you're talking to and where they're located. You hear different stories about, landowners who have maybe signed leases, long ago on terms that, they're not happy with as far as dollar values go, but then we're able to turn around, a couple of years later and sign with much more favorably. So I don't have the numbers out of the Farm Bureau in Pennsylvania off the top of my head, but I did talk to lots of farmers, and in Susquehanna County as well, right outside Vestal, who are in some of the, who got together to lease. Generally, their experience has been very positive. And the idea that, like Jim Van Blarkum and his brother, they own 1,000 acres and they do hogs and dairy, they're able to really improve their properties. And these people, many of whom never even had a concrete floor under an equipment shed, are able to do things like that. So again, it is anecdotal. A lot of it depends on, the age of the farmer, whether or not they're able to, able to continue or not, or bring the young people back. And you do hear different stories. The other thing I think it's important to keep in mind with agriculture is there are people that are in dairy that maybe wanted to go into a different line of farming too, but because they had no money to change the farm, to convert to something else. I'm talking and seeing people that are able to make changes in the type of farming that they're doing. It's giving them choices.
Yes, sir.
Steve Hurst from Windsor. Paul, can you tell me, when you put that commission together, you obviously had people from different viewpoints. How did you resolve those viewpoints and get them working together?
He's asking how do we resolve people have divergent opinions on our task force. I think they agreed to disagree to a certain extent, but what we did we challenged those who may come up with some unreasonable or put some unreasonable points out there on the table. One example I'll point to is there's a young woman who very passionately believes in environmental causes, and she threw a report on the table about 2 months into it that stated that there have been 1,500 violations by drilling companies in this many counties. And it was reported in the newspaper, and the industry person that saw that report said, okay, now here's this violation. We didn't cross this T, we didn't dot this I, this report came in late, this drop of water went here when it was supposed to go there. And I'm not belittling any of the activity, but 99% of these were technical and rather inconsequential violations. And I'm all for following the rules, but the scare tactics in the newspaper were, hundreds and hundreds of violations, and this industry is just starting. So we kept the bar high, we challenged, we had counter information when something inaccurate was out there. And it's great to see the Trout Unlimited president and the CEO of Pennsylvania General Energy talking, patting each other in the back, shaking hands, and it's meant a lot. I said we've had the impacts of it have included the Water Coalition and some of the other positive things, and I think the website, because we had that credibility and shot down these myths and overstatements and propaganda that always come up. I refer to my droid here with all these Yahoo stories. We don't take that crap, so I think that's why it has succeeded. In other counties, Bradford County, PA has a good one. Lycoming County, we modeled ours after Lycoming. They have a good one. I can only speak personally about ours.
Yeah, one of the statistics that was given to me just before was that Chesapeake Energy in 2010 spent $400 million in Pennsylvania rebuilding old roads and modernizing new ones. The gentleman right here.
Obviously, you live in the state and you live in a county. What the difference, I don't know, but right now I have there's some kind of a push to take away home rule from town boards or local municipalities, where they wouldn't have the right to ban drilling. And I don't know, I know that because of her actions, Bad Shucks has just handed Marianne Sumner of the town driver supervisor a bill for $5 million with a good installment related to repayment for the automatic renewals that they pay money out for. So I don't know what you have in Pennsylvania, and I would like the moderators and the former legislators to tell me what, if anything, is going on behind the scenes in the way of an Article 10, which is passed and signed in the middle of the night.
I'm going to be very brief on this one. I'm not real familiar with the differences. I can only state that Act 13, just passed and signed by the governor this year, does preempt a lot of local powers. We didn't like it, our township supervisors didn't like it. It was a result of a lot of extreme actions on the part of some municipalities to try to assert power that they just simply didn't have under the law or under the Constitution. There are still regulations, and if townships do want to regulate setbacks and things like that, whether it's wise or not, it's another thing. The industry can challenge it, and there's an arbiter set up. It's the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. They will hear both sides of it and determine whether the township or the borough, in our case, have gone over the line and exceeded their authority. But I think you can get a better answer from this gentleman than the broader question.
The honest answer I'll give you is that the legislature, any issue that they can avoid doing, and any excuse that they can find, they will find. They have a very strong excuse right now. There's 2 lawsuits working their way through the courts. They are not going to do anything until those cases are resolved, and they're not going to do anything until, if a gas exploration is approved by DEC, first next year you'll see legislation. But I think right now they're going to wait until these cases get up to the Court of Appeals where a decision is made. But all my life in Albany, if there was a court case started on anything, even whether you can go walk out the door to cross the street, they'll delay doing anything.
Focused on wind. Now, I'm thinking that little by little, we're going to take care of like putting a site committee, which will tell you where to put those mills, and they want to take away the town board's authority to have any kind of zoning laws or whatever against drilling, hydrocarbon, whatever you want to call it.
I think candidly, I came from a small community on the South Shore of Long Island. There is no legislator, Democrat or Republican, who doesn't pay homage every day to home rule, because they know that home rule means local votes. So I want to tell you something. I've never seen anything pass in my lifetime that took away home rule powers other than something that Nelson Rockefeller got through during the days of some crisis. They just don't do it. So the idea that they're scheming or planning, I will tell you, they never, ever, ever, Democrat or Republican, wants to be associated with taking away some kind of local home rule, because local officials can campaign against state legislators if they do that. So you may hear rumors, but I'm telling you, right now there is nothing going on in the state legislature. There are bills introduced in the various houses dealing with all these issues. Nothing is going to happen until those court cases are resolved.
I heard from the legislators out here, that we are not against hydrofracking, we are not against drilling. What we are afraid of is not getting elected.
Yes, that's I don't know any legislator who has not prayed to that divinity of getting reelected. Yes, sir. We'll get to you. All right, go ahead, sir.
Where's the governor right now on this issue?
Candidly, nowhere. He says, let the science and the facts prevail. And I can quote him on 26 occasions. He said that. That's his position. He's not getting in the middle of it. He's letting the agency go through the 60,000 some odd comments, many of which might have been crayon drawings from kids in public school, but nothing is going to happen, and he's not going to go out front on this at all. until maybe toward the end of the year when DEC decides what they're going to do. But he's playing it politically correct, not to inject himself into it. He's letting the process go along, but he said on numerous occasions, let the science and the facts prevail, and then we'll decide what to do. Yes, sir?
Speak for Greg or Commissioner. If you look at the issue of setbacks that we talked about as one disincentive for the companies, another possible one would be a replication of the impact fee like we've done in Pennsylvania in an attempt to recover money offset costs. And if you see that, maybe Greg, as a pending disincentive, will that play out after it happens?
Well, I think there is a committee, advisory group, to determine how much money the agency needs to do this, or how the state needs, actually, not just the agency. The numbers that have been thrown out are ridiculously high, and they're looking at the natural gas industry funding essentially all the shortfalls in the budget for the last 5 years. So that's not going to happen. Now, that's not to say that DEC doesn't need staff. The Division of Mineral Resources needs maybe 100 people. That's kind of what they've said. And you know, I can't tell you that that's the right number, but it's on that order of magnitude. So as part of this discussion, whether they're ever going to get to the impact fee part of this, whether there should be an impact fee, but my view is that the ad valorem tax is probably more than you get in an impact fee, so don't touch that. So, and the other thing is that I don't think we're going to, this is my opinion, I don't think we're going to have the kind of boom that you've seen in Pennsylvania, that this is going to roll out very slowly over time, very few permits issued until we get through the process because of all the uncertainty. So when the production revenues start to flow, it may be a while. And so I don't see how there'd be an impact fee paid to municipality for a while, if I get to that.
There's a product in the market that I just got downloaded on the website called Sterapran, which is being used in place of heavy volumes of water and all the super secret for the chemicals that they use to everybody else and everything else. This is supposed to be totally green. It's supposed to be not corrosive, not carcinogenic, not this, and not that. And I was wondering if you've heard about it, and if it's being used in this state.
I have not heard about it, but I will say that there is a provision in one of the appendices that I told you, 6 or 10, which says that the companies have to evaluate green alternatives. So what the state is saying basically is you have to justify why you're using this one and not that one. So as these products, you know, there's been a great technological advancement, even in the past few years, with drilling and production in Pennsylvania, with water recycling and disposal, and with these chemicals, you know, using food-grade additive-type chemicals instead of the other quote-unquote, you know, worse chemicals. So there is a push to use the green chemicals, and that is in the existing SGEIS. Well, certain companies, I think Halliburton has some kind of green fluid. So I don't know the specific one you're talking about, and I don't know the effect or efficiency of that. I'm sure John, just the same way he said about the gas frac, we don't know the efficiency of that, whether it's as good as the other processes, how that's going to work, you know, we just don't know.
Just want to make sure I don't want anybody to ever leave here frustrated that they didn't ask a question. So I will say this again, and which is very critical. You can only take these pens if you fill out the survey, and we can't make an evaluation of what we should or shouldn't be doing as we travel around the state without your input. I hope, yeah, on the table outside. But you know, we're putting our heart and soul into these meetings to try to give you as much input as possible on the issues, and we need your input in return. But to those of you who took the time today to come and stay, which is 99% of the people who we started out with today, we thank you very much. The panel is here to answer any questions. We're going to allow, apparently the people on the right side of the table, or on my side, are more ingenious at getting food than the people on the left side. But somehow we're going to work it out. But thank you again for coming. We appreciate you being here.
Great presentation. I learned a lot. I've gone through the television, but I learned a lot. The issue we had in our coalition, we put on education meetings, and some of them are not precise. We can't get people to come to. We get a few people, but the vast majority of them just along with the flow, and they don't know what the issues are. How do you overcome that?
It's really public education. I mean, you must be the exception to the rule. I mean, because, you know, I attended a meeting in Queens 2 weeks ago where there were 150 people in the room, and they're about as far away from gas exploration as anybody I know. But I think you just got to keep telling the public, get the information, and if you're only reaching out to a certain group, then try to figure out how to reach out to a wider group. Ensure that, you know, whether there's, you know, there's radio, there's public access, there are all these different things. Advertise it a little bit more, but I'm just saying there are ways to get out your message, and I'd be happy to discuss it off platform about some of the things you might do, but they can be done, and you can reach more people. But, you know, that's our goal, get to more people, get to more people.
Part of the problem is that people have made up their mind. And so when I talk to people, I've had discussion with people, and it's actually on YouTube. They taped it, and I said to them, well, I've told you that there's 10,000 wells drilled in the state, and there's no impact. And I've told you that we fracked the wells in the Barnett, 14,000 wells with no impact. And I told you we've been drilling in the Jamestown Aquifer since 1900 with no impact. What is it that you want me to tell you? What will convince you that hydrofracking is safe? That the way in which we've done hydrofracking for the past 50, 100 years is safe? And they don't want to answer that. So they've made up their mind, and they don't want to hear any more about it. They're not looking for they're not really looking for information, because they've based their opinion on things that aren't factual.